turning here to France, where 1 year from now, voters will go to the polls to elect a successor to President Emmanuel Macron. This weekend, members of the traditional right-wing party, Les Républicains, are voting to determine how they will choose their candidate. If they opt to forego a primary, the party's current leader, Bruno Retailleau, would become the official candidate. He's already declared his interest in running next year among what is becoming an increasingly crowded field. Well, for more, we can bring in one of our go-to specialists on French politics, Andrew Smith, a historian of modern France at Queen Mary University in London. Andrew, good morning. It's good to talk to you.
Good morning. Thank you.
Could you just start by walking us through the vote that's taking place this weekend? Who's voting and what options are they choosing from?
Absolutely. So this is an internal poll for the Les Républicains, the members of that party. There's about 76,000 of them, I think. That's down from when Bruno Retailleau was elected the president of the party. And basically, they've been given three options. The first option is that they have an internal members vote on a primary to select who goes forward as the party's nomination for the presidential election. The second option is a slightly broader one where they speak to not just party members, but also supporters to bring them in. And the third option is no votes, please. We'll go straight ahead with Bruno Retailleau, who is going to be our pick. So there's been a bit of a criticism of it from other people within the party. Laurent Wauquiez, of course, the leader of the kind of MPs of the party, he says, look, this is going to be a vote which is going to return North Korea numbers for Bruno Retailleau. He knows the party is with him, and that's not really what we need to know. Others, like the mayor of Cannes, David Lisnard, he's a very kind of economically liberal figure, big admirer of Javier Milei in Argentina. He says, look, this is a rigged vote, and he's left the party, basically, decided to try and set up his own movement to support his presidential ambitions. So it's going to settle some questions, but I don't think it's going to settle all questions when people vote on Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, so it sounds like they're likely to forego a primary and just choose Bruno Retailleau. There have been calls for a broader primary that would include the traditional right, but also the center. Do we think that that is looking likely to happen?
Well, we know if we look at the polling that's been conducted very recently, we can see there was one Le Monde and RTL did, which just at the end of March, which said about 82% of people want to see that kind of primary. There's been a lot of people calling for it. Of course, I mentioned Laurent Wauquiez just a short while ago. He really wants to see that primary, which almost unites everyone from the kind of the very centre all the way across to Reconquête, the Zemmourist party as well. Think of Sarah Knafo, who was a candidate for the Paris mayoral elections. And what they want to do with that is really try and secure voters' consent, get people to sign up to it. But some of the difficulties are that somebody like Edouard Philippe, for example, who is way ahead in the polls, he'll feel that actually he's done his primary. That was the mayoral election in Le Havre. He was endorsed by the voters. He is the popular candidate. However, somebody like Bruno Retailleau says, well, he feels that once the party endorses him, his numbers will broadly kind of meet Edouard Philippe's maybe around October time or something as well. And there'll be other people who'll come out of the woodwork as well. You know, we could see people like Xavier Bertrand, of course, a presidential candidate in the past who's been quite keen to jockey for position there. We could see other people, even like Dominique de Villepin, kind of back from the past, as it were, who didn't get the nominations when he sought to do it last time round, but is maybe kind of positioning himself as a sort of Gaullist continuity candidate amidst this crowded field. So it's a real difficulty for people who are already prominent. It has the risk of potentially damaging the momentum. For those who aren't yet prominent, they see it as being a way to kind of build momentum for a presidential challenge. So it can be a risky scenario, but I think the key thing is that the public seem to want the chance to give that initial sort of look over in terms of the candidacies.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's sort of trying to position themselves and avoid a scenario that would pit the far right of Marine Le Pen or Jordan Bardella against the far left of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Is that sort of assumed at this point to be the most likely scenario for a second round?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, as you said, the Rassemblement National have taken the unusual step of conducting their primary in the courtroom. We'll find out in July who their presidential candidate will be, whether Marine Le Pen's conviction for embezzlement is held up by the courts, which would then nominate the successor, the Dauphin, who's been nominated by the party. So they've dispensed with any element of internal democracy there. And that's really the fear that, you've got this difficulty. And the worry, I think, is for someone like Retailleau, he says, look, I don't want to have a primary if it's going to be the best of the rest. He sees himself as a kind of Champions League team. Doesn't want to play in the Europa League. His idea is that he wants to kind of put himself forward as a presidential candidate. He thinks he'll kind of advance in the polls and he'll get there on his own. And what he doesn't want is to kind of homogenize the other options and present them as a kind of bland centre, as opposed to the extremes. In the polls at the minute, we can still see that the National Rally have a very strong lead. However, it does seem that Edouard Philippe is the one candidate, according to the polls, who would actually beat them in the second round. Now, for him, the big fear is he looks to someone like, in the past, Edouard Balladur, another prime minister who led the race, who seemed like the popular choice, only to come third in the presidential elections, behind, of course, Chirac and Jospin. So I think there's got to be a challenge there. And the key is to avoid lots of candidates in the first round who get 1-2%. But likewise for the centre-right, they've got to beat that last time score of what? It was something like 4.7%. So an absolutely terrible result for them. And it's about trying to build a platform of consensus which can bring a lot of voters with you. But the difficulty is a lot of people want change, and that's what the extremes are trying to embody. We're going to see a lot of jockeying, trying to distance themselves in the centre from Macron, and still a lot of road yet to run. I think around October, we'll have a much, much clearer idea of who the actual final candidates will be. But until then, I think there's going to be a lot still to come, a lot of discussion, a lot of change, and we might even get a surprise.
Yeah, we have the center-right basically trying to find a way to beat out the far-right. And then we also have the center-left sort of looking to perhaps hold a primary minus the far-left of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Just briefly, because we're running out of time, what more are we seeing in terms of center-left candidates?
Yeah, I mean, so centre-left, in 2012, they had a great primary. That was what built the momentum for François Hollande. In 2022, they had a disaster, the People's Primary, where they nominated Christiane Taubira. She failed to get the nominations, and it really put the left into turmoil. So they want to kind of avoid that, but they want to have that kind of broad participation. Of course, you've got people like Gabriel Attal in the kind of the centre, Macron's left leg, if you will. But that goes right the way to people like François Ruffin, Raphael Glucksmann, Marine Tondelier for the Greens. Both Ruffin and Tondelier are people that are actually keen for a primary. People like Glucksmann are not that keen for the primary. It seems roughly that people like Ruffin and Glucksmann are preferred in the polls at this stage, but those numbers might coalesce once we actually see some advancement and certainty over who's going to stand. Really challenging to advance that notion of independence and difference from the far left, while explaining that they are not just another party that are going to prop up the centre. Difficult to convey that vision in this crowded centre.
Yeah, lots of political jockeying coming up over the next year. Andrew Smith, thank you so much, as always, for your analysis. That's Andrew Smith, a historian of modern France at Queen Mary University in London.